In 2000, the Museum of Modern Art in New York inducted a plastic computer peripheral into its permanent collection. It was a $199 multimedia speaker system built by Harman Kardon and Apple. It had no beige plastic. It used a transparent polycarbonate subwoofer that sat on the floor like a glowing jellyfish. The inclusion was a shock. Computer speakers in America were supposed to be cheap, buzzing boxes bundled with a PC. Suddenly, a 2.1 system designed for home offices was being treated as industrial sculpture. The paradox was its survival. The computers it was built to plug into became e-waste within 5 years. But the Harman Kardon sound sticks stayed. They outlasted the original iMac. They outlasted the iPod. But the real story of the sound sticks is not just how a computer speaker ended up in an art museum. It is the story of how American desktop audio finally demanded to be taken seriously. And what happened to that sound when the American desk itself began to disappear. Every week, we tell the stories of the American speakers, audio brands, and listening rooms that once shaped how people heard music, movies, and memory. And what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place. In Cupertino, California, in 1999. By the late 1990s, the American home office was a landscape of beige plastic. The personal computer had already conquered the desk. It was rapidly becoming the center of American digital life, absorbing the duties of the stereo receiver, the CD player, and the radio. But while the computer was processing the future of media, the audio equipment attached to it remained firmly trapped in the basement of consumer electronics. Before 1999, if an American consumer bought a desktop computer, they usually received a pair of generic, unbranded, or low-cost multimedia speakers bundled in the box. These were utilitarian devices. They were built to alert the user to an email, not to reproduce the emotional weight of a studio album. The system dictated the quality. In the fierce retail wars between Gateway, Compaq, and Dell, a computer package was sold on processor speed and hard drive space. The speakers were an afterthought, an accessory manufactured for pennies and thrown into the carton to complete the sale. They shared a uniform aesthetic: lightweight beige plastic, a flimsy wire, and a tiny driver, the moving part of a speaker that physically pushes air to create sound. Because these cabinets, the wooden, plastic, or composite boxes that hold the drivers, were hollow and cheap, they resonated badly. When an American listener turned up the volume, the plastic rattled. When they played a heavy bass line, the sound distorted. Distortion. Unwanted change added to the sound by the speaker or amplifier was the defining acoustic signature of the 1990s desktop. The American listening room was migrating. A college student in an East Coast dorm room was no longer sitting between two heavy wooden cabinets on a couch. They were sitting 3 feet away from a glowing glass monitor, ripping CDs into early digital files, or downloading MP3s. But they were listening through components that an audio engineer would classify as toys. The friction was becoming impossible to ignore. The music was digital, infinite, and immediate. The delivery mechanism was analog, fragile, and deeply flawed. The typical computer speaker relied on a cheap analog cable plugged directly into a noisy computer sound card. The electrical interference from the computer's internal power supply leaked into the audio signal, creating a constant, low-level hiss that lived under every song. The desktop did not just need a speaker that sounded slightly clearer. It needed a complete acoustic intervention. It needed a brand that understood how to move real air, but was willing to shrink that science down to fit next to a keyboard. In Cupertino, California, Apple was attempting to dismantle the beige computer market with the colorful, translucent iMac G3. But a computer designed to save the digital music industry could not sound like a tin can. Apple needed an audio partner with absolute engineering credibility. They called Harman Kardon. Harman Kardon was not a computer peripheral company. Founded in 1953 by Sidney Harman and Bernard Kardon, the brand had helped invent the American hi-fi industry. They had built the first integrated stereo receiver, a device combining an amplifier and a radio tuner, bringing high-fidelity audio out of the laboratory and into the American living room. They understood power, clarity, and the physical requirements of deep sound. Now they were asked to compress that legacy into a plastic accessory. The collaboration produced an acoustic shock. In October 1999, Apple and Harman Kardon introduced the iSub. It was not a pair of desktop speakers. It was a standalone USB subwoofer, a speaker specifically designed to reproduce very low bass frequencies. Priced at $90 in the United States, the iSub looked like nothing the audio market had ever seen. It was shaped like a clear polycarbonate jellyfish. It did not hide its internal components. The clear shell exposed the magnet structure, the heavy metal assembly that helps drive the voice coil and cone, and the thick internal wiring. In speaker manufacturing, transparency is a massive risk. A wooden cabinet hides excess glue, sloppy soldering, and cheap internal bracing. A clear plastic shell hides nothing. More importantly, the iSub was a down-firing design, meaning the woofer pushed sound directly downward into the floor or the desk. It turned bass into a physical sensation. Suddenly, a teenager playing a video game or listening to a hip-hop track in a suburban bedroom could feel the desk vibrate. The iSub did not just add sound, it added weight. It also solved the systemic noise problem of the 1990s desktop. The iSub connected via USB, keeping the audio signal entirely digital until it reached the speaker's internal hardware. This bypassed the cheap, noisy analog sound cards that plagued desktop computers, eliminating the hiss that American listeners had been conditioned to accept. The reception shifted the market's expectation of what a computer peripheral could be. Early adopters did not hide the iSub under the desk, where subwoofers traditionally lived. They placed the glowing, translucent dome directly on the desktop, treating it as a sculptural centerpiece. Audio reviewers and Macworld magazines noted that $99 finally bought real, measurable low-end frequency response for a personal computer. Harman Kardon had successfully injected hi-fi engineering into the desktop ecosystem, but a subwoofer only plays half the music. The iSub proved that bass could be beautiful. But to truly conquer the American desk, Harman Kardon had to build the rest of the band. The iSub was a revelation, but a subwoofer only handles the floor. The desktop itself was still silent. In July 2000, at the Macworld Expo in New York, Harman Kardon and Apple completed the circuit. They introduced the full SoundStick system. Priced at $199, it was a complete 2.1 multimedia system, a configuration using 2 small speakers for stereo separation and 1 subwoofer for bass. The transparent jellyfish subwoofer remained, but it was now flanked by 2 slender, clear towers. Each tower leaned backward on a heavy silver metallic ring, looking less like computer hardware and more like a prop from a science fiction film. To the American consumer standing in an electronics aisle, they were visually stunning. To an American audio engineer, they looked like an acoustic nightmare. The enclosures were made entirely of clear polycarbonate plastic. In traditional speaker design, the cabinet, the wooden, plastic, or composite box that holds the drivers, must be as acoustically dead as possible. Classic American hi-fi speakers use thick, dense wood to absorb internal energy. Plastic, by contrast, is a highly resonant material. Resonance, the tendency of a physical object to vibrate and add its own unwanted noise to the music, destroys clarity. If a speaker cabinet vibrates, it acts as a secondary sound source, smearing the details of a song and creating a hollow, cheap echo. Furthermore, because the sound sticks were completely transparent, Harman Kardon could not use internal acoustic dampening foam to absorb those rogue sound waves. You could see straight through the shell. There was nowhere to hide the acoustic compromises. The industrial design was dictated by Apple, but the physics of making that design actually sound good fell entirely to Harman Kardon. It was a brutal engineering challenge. The brand's acoustic engineers had to calculate the exact thickness of the polycarbonate and design highly specific internal airflow paths to ensure the plastic would not rattle when the volume was pushed. If the clear plastic buzzed during a heavy bass drop, the premium illusion would instantly shatter. For the two satellite speakers, small desktop cabinets designed to handle everything except deep bass, Harman Kardon did not use standard paper cones. Instead, they deployed 4 identical Odyssey transducers in each transparent tube. A transducer, or driver, is the moving part of a speaker that physically pushes air to create sound. By using aluminum dome drivers rather than cheap paper, the engineers achieved a stiff, lightweight moving surface. Aluminum does not flex easily under pressure. It allowed the sound sticks to produce incredibly sharp, fast high frequencies. The snap of a snare drum, the breath of a vocal, the metallic strike of a cymbal, without distorting at high volumes. By vertically stacking 4 of these small drivers in a line, the design also controlled how the sound dispersed across the desk. Instead of bouncing wildly off the hard surface of a glass CRT monitor or the flat expanse of a wooden tabletop, the sound was directed straight toward the listener's ears. It created a precise stereo image. The illusion that sounds come from specific places between and around 2 speakers. For the first time, an American computer user could sit at their desk, close their eyes, and point to exactly where the lead singer was standing. To complete the system, Harman Kardon maintained the digital USB connection. In the year 2000, plugging a speaker into a computer usually meant relying on the PC's internal analog sound card, which was essentially an antenna for electronic noise. The whir of the hard drive, the spin of the cooling fan, and the electrical processing of the motherboard all leaked into the audio cable, resulting in a persistent hiss. The sound sticks bypassed this completely. The digital audio signal traveled cleanly through the USB cable and was converted to analog sound inside the speaker itself, effectively isolating the music from the noisy environment of the computer chassis. Even the volume controls were engineered for the future. Instead of a cheap plastic dial that would eventually gather dust and crackle, Harman Kardon integrated capacitive touch buttons onto the right satellite speaker. A listener only had to tap the clear plastic to raise or lower the volume. The American market response was immediate. At $190, roughly $350 in modern currency, the sound sticks were significantly more expensive than the $20 beige boxes sold at Circuit City, but they were cheap enough to be aspirational. They did not just sit in living rooms, they invaded creative spaces. Graphic designers in San Francisco lofts, video editors in New York apartments, and college students in Boston dorm rooms bought them. Audio magazines, which historically ignored computer peripherals, were forced to review them. Publications like Macworld and mainstream tech reviewers praised the system not just for its transparency, but for its shocking acoustic punch. The sound sticks established a massive competitive moat. Other companies could easily manufacture cheap plastic speakers. Some could even attempt to make them clear. But no one else had the acoustic heritage to tune a hollow plastic tube so that it sounded like a premium bookshelf speaker. If a generic import brand tried to copy the look, the plastic would rattle, the bass would distort, and the audio would collapse. Harman Kardon had successfully bridged the gap between the heavy wooden heritage of American hi-fi and the sleek digital future of the personal computer. They proved that a listener did not have to sacrifice fidelity just because they were sitting 2 feet away from a screen. The clear polycarbonate was not just a design aesthetic. It was a promise that American desktop audio had finally earned the right to be taken seriously. By 2004, the Harman Kardon sound sticks had achieved something rare in the American audio market. They had survived their initial novelty. The original USB connection was a brilliant acoustic shield, isolating the music from the noisy motherboard of a computer. But it tied the speakers entirely to the Apple ecosystem. To truly conquer the American desktop, the sound sticks needed to speak to the generic PC. In 2004, Harman Kardon released the Sound Sticks 2. They abandoned the USB cable. They integrated a standard 3.5mm analog audio jack. Suddenly, the transparent towers were no longer just an iMac accessory. They could plug into a Dell in a Chicago home office, a gateway in a Texas dorm room, or an early white iPod resting on a suburban nightstand. The timing was perfect. The early 2000s marked a violent shift in American listening culture. The heavy wooden cabinets in the living room were going silent. The new American listening room was a stationary desk. A college student was no longer dropping a needle on a vinyl record and sitting on a couch. They were staring at a heavy glass monitor, waiting for a song to finish downloading on LimeWire, or organizing a massive digital library on iTunes. The computer was the absolute center of media consumption. In a cramped American dorm room, where space was tight and a traditional stereo receiver was too large to justify, a pair of transparent speakers and a glowing floor subwoofer could make a downloaded MP3 feel as massive, dynamic, and physically present as a living room hi-fi system. The sound sticks began to appear everywhere. They anchored creative studios in Brooklyn, where video editors needed clean sound without bulky wooden boxes. They sat on reception desks in Los Angeles design firms to signal modern taste. They filled college dormitories in Michigan, suburban bedrooms in Florida, and home offices in Seattle. They appeared on the display shelves of CompUSA and Circuit City, completely dwarfing the cheap plastic multimedia speakers sitting next to them. The desk was no longer a place just to type. It was a place to actively listen. Harman Kardon had mastered near-field listening, a setup where the listener sits only a few feet away from the speakers, allowing the direct sound to reach their ears before it can bounce off the walls and muddy the detail. Because the sound stick's 4 small aluminum drivers were aimed directly at the user's head, the stereo image was razor sharp. You did not have to close your eyes to hear the band in front of you. The singer was floating right above the keyboard. The transparent subwoofer remained the anchor of the system. It was designed to sit on the floor, hidden under the desk, but owners rarely hid it. A blue LED glowed through the polycarbonate shell, turning the floor into a visual extension of the music. The down-firing woofer, pushing bass frequencies directly into the floorboards. Made video games feel explosive and kick drums feel tactile. Parents in suburban homes quickly realized that a $199 computer speaker could rattle the ceiling of the room below. By the late 2000s, the sound sticks had sold in the millions. They had evolved from a weird Apple peripheral into a definitive American audio standard. The design was so iconic that Harman Kardon barely touched it for a decade, while other speaker companies scrambled to redesign their beige boxes into black plastic towers. The sound sticks remained frozen in time because the transparent aesthetic simply did not age. The induction into the Museum of Modern Art was not just an art world footnote. It was validation that American industrial design and acoustic engineering had successfully merged. The transparent towers had successfully replaced the living room hi-fi. But maintaining that empire required the American desk to remain exactly as it was. By the mid-2000s, the stationary desk was an immovable American institution. In a suburban home in Ohio, a college apartment in Texas, or a graphic design firm in Chicago, the desktop computer was the undisputed center of gravity. It was the digital hub for a sprawling iTunes library, a DVD drive, and a broadband internet connection. The Harman Kardon Sound Sticks 2 sat on either side of a flat panel monitor like glass sentinels, guarding this new listening room. The irony of the digital music boom was that audio quality had actually plummeted. Millions of American listeners were downloading highly compressed MP3 files or ripping CDs at low bit rates to save expensive hard drive space. Played through generic, beige computer speakers, these digital files sounded brittle, lifeless, and metallic. The sound sticks masked the worst of this digital compression. The 4 aluminum dome drivers in each transparent tower delivered enough sharp, high-end detail to make a compressed vocal sound clear, while the down-firing subwoofer pumped enough physical bass into the floorboards to make the listener forget what they were missing in the mid-range. They did not just play the music, they physically translated it into the room. They became the default premium upgrade. A customer walking into a Magnolia home theater room inside a Best Buy or browsing an early online electronics catalog understood the hierarchy. You bought generic plastic speakers if you only needed to hear an email notification. You paid $199 for the Harman Kardon system if you actually cared about the music. For a generation of American listeners who had never owned a traditional stereo receiver, a heavy pair of wooden bookshelf speakers, or a turntable, the sound sticks were not a compromise. In a crowded bedroom where a traditional hi-fi system simply would not fit, these transparent tubes were the only stereo system that mattered. The true scale of the soundstick's success was not just how many units Harman Kardon sold, but how long they refused to change them. In the hyper-accelerated American consumer electronics market, a product is usually redesigned, replaced, or discontinued within 24 months. The soundsticks defied this gravity. Harman Kardon kept the exact same transparent industrial design in continuous production for over a decade. When Apple introduced the Power Mac G4 Cube in 2000, they bundled it with their own spherical, transparent Apple Pro speakers, which were also quietly engineered by Harman Kardon. But when the G4 Cube failed in the retail market and was abruptly discontinued, the Apple Pro speakers vanished with it. The soundsticks, because they were an independent system with a universal analog plug, marched forward. They outlived the product ecosystem that birthed them. They survived the death of the heavy glass CRT monitor. They survived the transition from the PowerPC chip to Intel processors. They survived the collapse of the compact disc. While computer manufacturers completely redesigned their machines every few years, abandoning colored plastics for brushed aluminum, black glass, and matte steel, the transparent soundsticks remained on the desk. They looked perfectly at home next to machines that had not even been invented when the speakers were first drawn on a drafting board. The speaker system transcended its role as a computer peripheral and became a cultural signifier. It appeared in Hollywood films to silently communicate that a character was wealthy, modern, and technologically literate. It appeared in high-end architectural magazines, sitting on glass tables, in minimalist New York apartments. The industrial design was so confident that competitors largely stopped trying to copy it. Any brand that attempted to build a clear plastic speaker was immediately dismissed as a cheap imitation. The volume of sales was staggering for a premium computer audio product. They moved through massive American retail channels, Circuit City aisles, Apple Store displays, Mac Mall catalogs, and the burgeoning Amazon online storefront. In the mid-2000s, the American listening ritual was completely anchored to the desk. A user would sit in front of the screen, connect a white iPod via a white cable, and wait for the digital library to sync. During that time, the music played out loud. The desk was no longer just a workstation. It was the modern American jukebox. The glowing blue light of the soundstick's subwoofer, reflecting off the floor in a darkened room, became a defining visual memory of the early broadband era. Harman Kardon had conquered the stationary desk, proving that an American listener would gladly pay for premium audio if it looked like the future. But they were about to discover that the American desk was not a permanent structure. The decline of an American audio empire is rarely caused by a sudden drop in acoustic quality. A speaker does not suddenly forget how to reproduce a high frequency. The magnet does not simply lose its grip on the voice coil. Instead, the market is usually destroyed by a shift in how the physical room is used. For the Harman Kardon sound sticks, the destruction arrived through Force 5, a total technological and listening culture shift. The small crack in the foundation did not come from a competing audio brand. It came from the very company that had helped launch the speakers in the first place. It came from Apple and the massive American consumer shift toward the laptop computer. In the early 2000s, the desktop computer was a piece of furniture. It was heavy, tethered to the wall, and surrounded by peripherals. But by the late 2000s, the heavy glass monitor and the beige plastic tower were rapidly being replaced by the MacBook and the Windows laptop. An American college student in a Michigan dorm room no longer needed to sit in a dedicated desk chair to download an album, type a paper, or watch a video. They could take the aluminum laptop to the bed, to the couch, or across campus to a coffee shop. The stationary desk was losing its gravity, and this presented a massive systemic problem for a 2.1 multimedia system. The sound sticks were brilliant, but they required permanent physical infrastructure. A 2.1 system, a configuration using 2 small speakers for stereo separation and 1 subwoofer for bass, cannot be easily moved. The heavy polycarbonate subwoofer had to remain on the floor. The 2 clear satellite towers had to be placed exactly at ear level on a flat surface to maintain their precise stereo image. Thick, proprietary cables connected the satellite towers to the subwoofer. A heavy power brick ran to the wall outlet, and a thick analog audio cable required a physical connection to the computer's 3.5mm headphone jack. When the desk was the permanent center of the room, these wires were invisible. But the moment the computer became mobile, the sound sticks transformed from a premium audio solution into a physical tether. If a listener wanted to hear deep bass and clear vocals, they had to sit perfectly still. The moment they picked up their laptop to move to the living room couch, the music was violently severed. They had to physically unplug the audio cable, leaving the glowing transparent towers sitting silent on a dusty desk. The American listener had not stopped caring about music, but they had started prioritizing the freedom to move over the fidelity of the sound. The desk was no longer a premium destination. It was slowly becoming a temporary docking station. As the years passed, the physical reality of the hardware also began to betray the futuristic design. The transparent polycarbonate enclosures of the speakers themselves aged beautifully, but the wiring did not. The thick, rubbery cable jackets that carried the audio signal and power absorbed sunlight, heat, and oils from human hands. Over a decade of use, the pristine, clear silver wires slowly oxidized, turning a nicotine-stained yellow. Because the entire system was hardwired together, a failure in one cable threatened the whole investment. If a dorm room chair rolled over the subwoofer cable and severed the copper inside, the satellite tower went dead. If the 3.5mm analog plug bent inside a laptop port, the system was reduced to static. A listener could not simply swap out a standard speaker wire. The beautiful, integrated industrial design meant that a single frayed connection could turn a $109 acoustic masterpiece into a piece of plastic floor art. At the same time, the distribution channels that had made the sound sticks an aspirational purchase were collapsing. Force 2, the pressure of modern retail, began to crack the foundation of how Americans bought audio. In the early 2000s, an American buyer could walk into a CompUSA or a Circuit City and physically hear the transparent speakers rattle a display shelf. The physical demonstration was crucial. You had to feel the down-firing subwoofer vibrate the floorboards to understand why it cost 10 times more than a generic beige box. But by 2009, Circuit City had filed for bankruptcy. CompUSA stores had been liquidated. The mall electronics culture was being decimated by the rise of Amazon and online, direct-to-consumer sales. The sound sticks were forced to compete on a digital web page, where a clear plastic speaker could no longer prove its acoustic superiority. On a computer screen, a shopper could not hear the aluminum drivers punch through the mid-range. They could only look at the price tag. The system had to compete on a spec sheet against dozens of cheaper, generic black plastic systems imported from overseas that promised good enough sound for a fraction of the cost. The American retail landscape was actively dismantling the showroom, removing the exact environment where Harman Kardon's engineering had always won the argument. The laptop had broken the necessity of the desktop. The collapse of big box retail had broken the demonstration room, but the laptop still occasionally returned to the desk to charge, and the sound sticks still occasionally played music. The fatal blow to the wired multimedia empire would not come from a computer at all. It would come from a device that fit inside a pocket, and a wireless signal that would make the concept of the desktop speaker completely obsolete. By the early 2010s, the American listener stopped looking at the computer monitor and started looking at their phone. The smartphone was rapidly absorbing the MP3 player, the camera, and the broadband internet connection. The digital music library was no longer anchored to a spinning hard drive sitting inside a computer chassis. It was streaming directly from the cloud, resting in a pocket, and moving freely through the house. To release that music into a room without relying on a computer, the market embraced the Bluetooth speaker, a portable device with a built-in battery that receives sound wirelessly from a phone, tablet, or computer. This technological shift completely destroyed the fundamental premise of the Harman Kardon sound sticks. The sound sticks were an acoustic masterpiece, but they were a masterpiece of fixed geography. The system required a heavy subwoofer resting on the floor. It required two delicate polycarbonate towers positioned perfectly on a flat surface. It required a thick power brick plugged into a wall outlet. It required a physical analog wire plugged into a headphone jack. A listener in a California apartment could not take the sound sticks to the kitchen to cook. A college student in a Boston dorm could not throw the glass-like subwoofer into a backpack and take it to the campus lawn. The speakers were anchored to a specific piece of furniture that was rapidly losing its importance. The American home office was being actively dismantled. College students stopped buying desktop computers entirely. The heavy glass monitors were hauled to recycling centers. The desk itself was replaced by a laptop resting on a living room sofa or a tablet held in bed. The physical room that the sound sticks were designed to fill simply stopped existing as a dedicated listening space. In its place came a wave of portable, rugged, battery-powered cylinders. Brands like Ultimate Ears launched the UE Boom. JBL, ironically, a sister company operating under the same corporate umbrella as Harman Kardon, launched the JBL Flip. These were small, indestructible, waterproof tubes covered in durable fabric. Acoustically, they were a massive downgrade from the sound sticks. A single Bluetooth cylinder cannot create a true stereo image. The illusion that sounds come from specific places between and around two speakers. A portable tube cannot separate the left and right audio channels with physical distance. It cannot drop bass into the floorboards the way a dedicated down-firing subwoofer can. But the American audio market was teaching an old, brutal lesson. When ultimate fidelity competes with ultimate convenience, convenience almost always wins. The buyer did not care that the Bluetooth speaker collapsed the soundstage. They cared that it did not have wires. They cared that it could sit on a patio table. They cared that it survived a drop on the kitchen floor. The American listener traded the acoustic precision of the desk for the freedom to carry their music anywhere. In the retail sector, the environment that had always protected the sound sticks was vanishing. In the early 2000s, an American buyer walked into a computer store, saw the transparent towers, and heard the massive bass. But by the 2010s, the dedicated computer electronics chains were dead or dying. Best Buy shrank its desktop audio aisles to make room for massive, colorful displays of portable Bluetooth speakers. The visual context changed. Next to a sleek, wireless smartphone, a wired 2.1 speaker system with a bulky power brick and a spiderweb of thick cables suddenly looked less like the future and more like a complicated burden. The sound sticks became a relic of a highly specific behavioral era. They were built for the age of iTunes, when managing digital music required sitting down, opening a program, organizing files, and physically connecting an iPod with a white cable. That ritual demanded a stationary command center, but the rise of Spotify and Apple Music meant that the listener no longer needed a command center at all. The music was everywhere, but the sound sticks were stuck in one place. The system was not failing because the aluminum drivers degraded. It was not failing because the polycarbonate cracked. It was failing because the way America listened to music had fundamentally bypassed the wired connection. The beautiful transparent towers were left standing on desks that were increasingly used only for storage. The blue light of the subwoofer still glowed, but the cables attached to it were gathering dust. The analog audio cable lay empty on the wood veneer, waiting for a computer that had already been moved to another room. The shift was absolute. The listener walked away. The phone held the music. The laptop moved. The desk cleared. The cables remained. The plastic aged. The subwoofer stopped. The room emptied. The sound sticks were not defeated by a better desktop speaker. They were defeated by a market that decided the desk was no longer necessary. Harman Kardon realized that the stationary desk was dead, but the industrial design of their transparent towers was too valuable to bury. Instead of discontinuing the system, they mutated it. As the 2010s progressed, the company released the SoundSticks 3 and eventually the SoundSticks Wireless. They completely severed the acoustic tether. By adding Bluetooth receivers to the internal circuitry, they allowed the system to survive the death of the desktop computer. But in doing so, the product's core identity changed. It was no longer a multimedia speaker built specifically to bypass a noisy PC sound card. It was repositioned as a standalone wireless art piece for the living room. The corporate structure behind the badge was also changing. In 2017, Harman International, the parent company of Harman Kardon, JBL, and Infinity, was acquired by the massive global conglomerate Samsung. The brand survived, but the deeply American audio engineering culture that had birthed the original acoustic suspension systems and the first stereo receivers was now absorbed into a massive international electronics portfolio. Yet the original wired units did not end up in landfills like the millions of beige plastic boxes they replaced. Across the United States, a massive preservation community has claimed the early sound sticks. On Reddit forums, vintage Apple collector boards, and Facebook Marketplace, a new generation of listeners actively hunts for the original USB iSubs and the analog sound sticks too. College students in Chicago scour thrift stores for the transparent polycarbonate towers. Because the plastic was totally clear, the aging process is brutally visible. The thick rubber cables oxidize, turning from pristine silver to a nicotine-stained yellow. The rubber feet that isolate the satellite towers dry out and crack. But instead of throwing them away, vintage audio collectors and Y2K aesthetic enthusiasts restore them. They use automotive headlight polish to buff the scratches out of the acrylic shells. They carefully slice open the sealed jellyfish subwoofers to repair frayed internal wiring. They splice new copper lines to keep the heavy 2.1 system alive. They do not treat these units as obsolete PC peripherals. They treat them as mid-century modern furniture. This survival is not merely driven by visual nostalgia for the early 2000s. The original sound sticks still matter today because of a stubborn acoustic truth. Physics cannot be faked. The modern American audio market is dominated by smart speakers and Bluetooth cylinders wrapped in gray fabric. These single-point devices rely on aggressive digital signal processing, software algorithms that manipulate the audio to artificially bounce sound off walls and fake a wide room. But a single cylinder cannot physically separate the left and right audio channels. The original Harman Kardon sound sticks, with their 2 independent satellite towers and a dedicated downfiring subwoofer, create a genuine, physical stereo image. The 4 aluminum Odyssey drivers push direct sound, audio traveling straight from the speaker to the listener, right to the ear. The singer is actually standing in the center of the desk, not trapped inside a digital algorithm. Real air is actually being moved against the floorboards. For a listener sitting 2 feet away, the mechanical precision of this 20-year-old plastic system still easily defeats the algorithmic tricks of a modern smart speaker. The retail environment that made this acoustic dominance obvious, however, has been completely erased. The massive Circuit City and CompUSA showrooms across the American suburbs, where listeners once stood in carpeted aisles to feel the transparent subwoofers shake the display racks, are gone. Those massive big-box buildings have been demolished, partitioned into fitness centers, or turned into seasonal Halloween costume pop-ups. The physical space where American audio engineering once proved itself in head-to-head demonstrations against cheap plastic imports no longer exists. Even the original Apple Infinite Loop campus in Cupertino, where the iSub was first sketched out, has been quietly eclipsed by a massive corporate spaceship ring, leaving the era of the colorful, translucent desktop computer far behind. But the strangest footnote of the Soundsticks empire is not where they were sold, but where they are kept. Long after the beige gateway towers, the heavy glass CRT monitors, and the Apple Power Mac G4 cubes were shredded for scrap metal, the original Soundsticks remain in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. They are one of the only computer accessories in American history to cross the boundary into permanent industrial art. They sit in the same institutional memory as the Eames chair, the Fender Stratocaster, and classic American architecture. The American consumer electronics market is structurally designed to reward disposability. The market demands that technology shrink, that wires disappear, and that the physical footprint of music is reduced to a phone sliding into a pocket. We traded the stationary listening desk for the convenience of walking around the house. We traded physical acoustic separation for wireless Bluetooth pairing. But the survival of the Soundsticks proves that even in the most disposable era of computing, the listener still secretly craves a physical relationship with sound. It proves that a company that respected the physics of moving air could build something permanent, even if they built it out of plastic. Somewhere in a quiet American suburb, under a heavy wooden desk that no longer holds a desktop computer, a transparent polycarbonate subwoofer still glows blue in the dark, its analog cable plugged into a modern laptop, pushing bass into the floorboards, waiting for one more song to move the room. See you in the next one.